Hi guys, today I'm going to cover the first part of Unit 4, Section B, and I'm going to start with the vocab, and there are a lot of different vocabulary words because this is a really big chapter. So I'm going to give you guys a homework for this vocab, and these are the vocabs that you need to define and sort them into different categories. Okay, the first part of the Unit 4, Section B is the structure of Earth and carbon cycle. The Earth layers. The Earth is made of four different and distinct layers: the crust, mantle, outer core, inner core. And yes, you do need to know these four different layers and what they are like. The deeper layers are composed of heavier materials. Usually, they are hotter, denser, and under much greater pressure than the outer layers. It kind of makes sense as you go to the center of the Earth, you have more um, layers above you, right? And then which will create more pressure and more temperature. So here is a picture representation of these four different layers. Here's the crust, here's the mantle, here's the outer core, here's the inner core. Starting with the crust. The crust is a rigid, rocky outer surface of the Earth, and on the top of the crust is where we live. The Earth's crust is like the skin of an apple. It is very thin in comparison to the any other three layers. The crust of the Earth is broken into many pieces called plate. So here's a picture of a different plate that we are living on. So North American has their own plate, right? And then right on the west coast, that's where a different plate called the Pacific Plate is neighboring. Then next, the mantle. The mantle is the largest layer of the Earth. And the mantle is composed of very hot, dense rock that flows like asphalt under a heavy weight. The movement of the middle mantle is the reason that the crustal plates of the Earth move. So basically, you can think of these mantle as like rock, but they're such under high temperature, so they melt it down. So they basically move like liquid, even though they are kind of solid. Outer core. The core of the Earth is like the ball of very hot metals. So the core is actually made mainly with a metal. The outer core is so hot that the metals in it are all in the liquid state. But due to the high temperature, the metals has melted down, and now they are in liquid state. The outer core is composed of the melted metals of nickel and iron. The inner core. Inner core of the Earth has the temperatures and pressures so great that the metals are squeezed together into small space, and they are not able to move like liquid. But because there's so much pressure built it on, even though they're high temperature, it is going to be actually packed into a form of solid. Convection current. Okay, the mantle, right? Mantle is a very hot solid that now they become liquidified, right? They're like rocks and soil. Because of high temperature, they melted down. So this mantle is going to be continuously moving, and the movement of this mantle is called a convection current. Convection, we already learned from the previous lesson, this is a type of energy transfer. Convection is a type of energy transfer when a liquid or gas is going to particles actually move to transfer the heat energy. So it makes sense. The mantle, right? The melted down rocks and the soil, right? They are actually moving to transfer the heat energy. So we call them convection current. And this is caused by the very hot material at the deepest part of the mantle rising, then cooling and sinking again and repeating this cycle over and over. So as they go to the center, right, get closer to the outer core, it becomes hotter and hotter. And it goes toward out to the crust, it becomes cooler. And because there's a temperature difference, they are going to keep moving, right? And then that creates convection current. Okay, so here's another representation about the convection current. So as you can tell here in this picture, there are mantle outside and they're just continuously moving. And sometimes these hot mantle will actually find a little opening, right? Right here, opening typically between the two different plates. And then the mantle is going to rise out of that. And that's why we know them as volcanoes. Here. So here is a mantle, and sometimes these hot um, liquefied solid is going to actually escape through the crust opening, and then we call them magma, right? And then they come out of the volcano, and now they flow down as a lava. Okay, volcanic activity and atmosphere. Volcano eruption and burning after the eruption releases a tremendous amount of carbon dioxide into atmosphere. So as you can see on this picture, when the volcano erupts, right, you can see a lot of dust and also carbon dioxide is going to erupt out of it. This is an example of a part of a carbon cycle from a geosphere to atmosphere. Geosphere is basically like the land or soil, right? And then atmosphere is the air above the earth. So when carbon transfers from the volcano into the sky, that is called a carbon cycle. That's how carbon transfers from one place to another place in Earth system, and is specifically from geosphere to atmosphere. Earth system. Okay, so in the big picture, we're gonna go ahead and divide the Earth into four different systems. We have an atmosphere, we have biosphere, we have a geosphere, and a hydrosphere. Okay, so geosphere, well, which is another name for lithosphere. This is basically the solid Earth, like the land, soil, right? And then we have an atmosphere, which is basically the gases, the air, right? And hydrosphere is basically water, as the hydro, right, for the water. And a biosphere is for all life. Carbon cycle. Energy is not the only thing transferred and transformed from one place to another. Materials such as water, carbon, hydrogen, and nitrogen are passed from one organism to another as well. So they are continuously moving. Well, for this chapter, we are going to actually focus on just carbon, and we're going to call that carbon cycle. Carbon can be transferred within the same sphere. For example, from a biosphere to biosphere, and that would be basically an example when one animal, right, feed on maybe plants, grass, right? So when one organism eats the other one, right, that's when how the carbon transfers. Carbon can also be transferred from one sphere to another, such as atmosphere to hydrosphere. So, if there is any kind of carbon dioxide floating on the air, and then if they react with water, and then what we call them a carbonic acid, and then they land on over the ocean or the river in the process for the raining, right? That's called how carbon transfers from atmosphere to hydrosphere. Plants breathe in carbon dioxide from human and take in other carbon from the soil that poop out or from decaying bodies, right? So any kind of carbon that we generate, right, that goes into the soil, and then plants are going to use those carbon dioxide and any other carbon, right? And then they are going to go through the process called photosynthesis, right, to give the oxygen and sugar. Humans and other organisms get carbon by eating the plant and oxygen by breathing. And then, in return, humans are going to give out the carbon dioxide. So, this is a good example of a biosphere to biosphere carbon transfer. The carbon can also can be found at the ground level, actually under the ground level. Um, After many years of the pressure and hot temperature under the ground, right? A lot of carbons that were generated before sometime in the history of the Earth, and under that high temperature and pressure, they have actually turned into a coals, right? And these are now the we are known as a fuel that we use therefore to generate the energy. And then after many years have passed during the 1900s, the coal has become basically the source of the energy. We burn them because they're easily combustible, and we use them to run the turbine to get the energy out of it. But in return, we also generate tremendous amount of carbon dioxide, which will then goes into the air. So this is an example of a carbon transfer from a geosphere to atmosphere, because the coals are found in the geosphere, and then when we release the carbon dioxide into the air, that's transferred to atmosphere.